have registration, so we're trying to give people a chance.
Yeah, we've had probably 8 in the last minute, so.
So how many people registered for this?
Well, when they heard it was you, we had over 1,000, but we told them we couldn't take that many.
Don't worry, my ego won't be hurt either way.
I'm not sure what our final numbers were, but we typically have about 100 people for our membership meetings. I think we were between 50 and 60 that had signed up for this online, but we're going to do the recording afterwards. So you're going to get to see a lot more of our realtors later too.
Oh.
Because we're going to record and share it for anybody that misses it. Make sure they all get some great information from you.
25 plus us.
So we had 30 registered for the class today.
Okay, we'll start in a minute at 9:35. Ah, it's 9:35. Good morning, everybody. How are you? How is everybody this morning? So hello to all the PAAR members. Thank you all for joining us today. First, I wanted to let you know that we're committed to providing you with the resources you need to be successful in this new world of social distancing. I hope you are taking advantage of the Zoom programs and the Facebook Live events we have been offering to help you increase your virtual toolbox or to give you the information you need to navigate through these uncharted waters. Today, legal and professional standards in the wake of COVID-19 is a chance to get some guidance and talk about some of the things that should be on your radar during this unprecedented time. So in addition to what we discussed today, I would encourage all of you to visit the Arizona Realtors Coronavirus resource. It's at www.aaronline, all one word, .com/COVID-19 / and the National Association of Realtors Coronavirus Resources at www.nar.realtor/coronavirus. And watch out for updates from PAAR via email and or posts on Recess and Facebook. We've been getting a lot of those, trying to keep everybody updated, let you know what's the current phase that we're in, I guess, to get back on track and keep everybody safe and healthy. So to our attendees, please make sure to share your questions and comments to the panelists and attendees in the chat box. So if you scroll around on your screen, you should pull up the chat box. You can get in there and make any questions you have during this, and we will try to address all of them. And before this is over, and then if there's anything that's outstanding that needs to be answered, we can do that on an individual basis. Please know that we will try to address, like I said, all the questions as the time permits. Okay, so now I know you all didn't come here to see me, but I'm going to stay on the screen, so I'm not going anywhere, sorry. But instead, you came here to hear from Nikki Salgat. Did I pronounce Salgat right? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. And Nikki recently joined Arizona Association of Realtors as Assistant General Counsel. He has worked for AAR since 2014 and used to work for Mack Watson and Stratman as a hotline attorney. I'm looking at the list of people that are on here. I would say probably about 98% of you know who Nikki is. And so, if not all of you. So I will now turn it over to Nikki. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and, so just a little bit of beforehand is usually, of course, you know, this is the new way of the world, right? Zoom presentations, and sometimes it's pretty tough to present when you don't have that interaction that you generally have in person, and I think we really do so much better when we are able to interact. So please definitely feel free if you have questions to, you know, put them in the chat box. because this is a webinar, we don't, have the capabilities to show our face and to speak up that way. But, I'd like to be able to address any questions I can, that you have. I just, sometimes it's tough feeling like you're just talking to yourself. So please feel free to interact with me. This is me begging you to interact with me. So I'm going to share my screen and pull up my presentation. Oh geez, I hope I'm pulling up the right one. And if I'm not, yes, I am. Okay, because I would just want to make sure I have the right screen. So this is the beginning. So today what I want to talk about is a little bit of the, this is, like you said, unprecedented times, uncharted waters. It's been a whirlwind of a time for all of us since mid-March. And, the state is starting to open up and now things are starting to change again. However, that being said, real estate is still booming. From my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, real estate, we haven't had any issues really for the most part with regard to selling, listing. I think I read an article this morning that was talking about, Arizona has one of the, excuse me, one of the best-selling markets during these times. And would that be your experience too? Yeah, that's great. So, we were fortunate enough that the governor had said that we are essential, that we're an essential business. And we've also been fortunate, I know that the legislative department here at AAR worked very hard to ensure that realtors, real estate agents, that it is still an essential business. And we're fortunate also that we didn't have to worry about any of the other businesses that we've had going down. So in other words, they didn't close down on us. We still had title folks that were open. The recorder's offices. Was your recorder's office still open up there? I know Maricopa.
Yes, you could do a lot of it online. It's actually fully open now, but still by appointment and only so many at a time. And kudos to RAPAC. I mean, for getting us that essential service position with the governor. Fantastic. So
yeah, thank you. So I kind of wanted to put that out there that, these are definitely unprecedented times. So this might be a little bit different than what we would normally see. So I usually like to start off because it is May. See, I'm forgetting the days and I've been working every single day. So it's May 29th. And so, of course, we have forms releases that happen 3 times a year at AAR. And pursuant to the bylaws, we have forms that will be released only 3 times, which is February 1st, June 1st, and October 1st. And what that means is that if there's a new form, there's a revision to a form, those are the times when you are going to have to pay particular attention to what may be being released, because your forms are going to be updated and you want to stay on top of that as your business, in your business practice. Now, of course, there's always an exception, and the exception is unless there's a change in law. Now, if there's a change in law, then we're going to have, potentially have a form release that doesn't fall within one of those 3 dates. So with Monday being June 1st, we just had an article that went out in the Voice that discussed the changes to the forms, but I'm going to go over them quickly, just so that you have them at the forefront of your mind. Here's what is going to happen to the forms. They're all pretty minor. So it's nothing that we have to worry too much about sending out major education. Usually if we have big changes to forms, we send out a lot of articles and try to make sure our members are educated about whatever the changes are coming up. So the first form, I couldn't fit the title in my PowerPoint here. It was way too long. So we know the buyer's inspection notice and seller's response, which is lovingly called the BINSOR. So what I have here are just 2 little excerpts of what is going to change. And essentially, it's a whole bunch of lines were added to the form. And the reason for it, first of all, let's start with what we said when the contract. Remember when page 8 of the contract, it extended for additional terms and conditions, and we added all these lines. Just because we added additional lines does not mean you need to fill those lines, right? So those lines, it doesn't mean you need to ensure that you request more repairs or, whatever the case is. But ultimately, the lines were added because it was helping us resolve an issue that we were having with transaction desk. And this allows, with all these additional lines, it allows for the text now to wrap when you're utilizing transaction desk. And so that it also doesn't make it so small that you can't read it. So that was the major reason for this change to the Binzer on why there were additional lines. Let's see, the next form is the counteroffer. Can you see these? Can you see my PowerPoint pretty well? Okay, good, because we tried to practice a little bit in the beginning here at work to make sure that they were still visible, but I want to ensure that you guys can see them. Now what you'll see when a form changes, you can see right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse at the top corner, that's when you know a document has been updated because it'll tell you the date. Now this is the red line form. Of course, the forms won't look like this coming out of your providers. So these are just what we show on our website so that you know what has been updated. And on the counter offer, all we updated here is line 19 and it says terms of acceptance. We changed the title to that so that it matches the contract because of course we want to ensure that all of our forms line up well, that they're consistent with each other. And so that was the reason behind this change, is we changed the term here on line 19 to terms of acceptance so it matches the contract. And then we changed the verbiage here in red that a signed copy delivered in person by mail, fax, or electronically. And that just matches the verbiage in the contract. Once again, just consistency, okay? So the HOA addendum. Now the HOA addendum, I don't know how it's working out for you guys, but you know, we've fielded multiple requests here at the association wherein we have people utilizing the homeowners association addendum incorrectly. So in other words, what they generally were doing, the sellers would fill out the form in its entirety. So as you can see on page 3 here, they would start filling out what they were willing to pay or not to pay, or automatically say buyer's going to pay these transfer fees, etc. And then they would upload that into the MLS. Well, that wasn't the intent of the form when the form was created, right? The intent of the form was for the seller to be able to disclose those fees which would affect the transaction, and to let the buyers, the potential buyer, know, hey, these are fees that could be associated when we actually purchase a home. And so ultimately page 3 is set for the buyers to fill out and say, okay, this is what we want to negotiate, because it's an addendum, right? We're negotiating these fees on what we will pay or what we're going to ask the seller to pay. And so we added on line 4, you'll see here, so homeowners association information on page 1 to be completed by the seller. Now, so what we're saying is we're kind of directing the seller, hey, look, we really want you to disclose these items and those fees that are associated with the property. We don't want you to be filling out other portions of it, because really it's for the buyer to negotiate it with the contract. Now there is, which I did not include down here on page 3, there is an additional terms portion in which the seller could absolutely fill out that section on the contract if they have, or on the addendum, if they wanted to add some sort of any information, right? We're not saying you absolutely can't fill out the additional terms portion, but mostly we really want them to stick to page 1 and to fill out and disclose those fees. And so then you'll see on line 72 where it says, note line 75 through 81 to be completed only by the buyer and not the seller. So in other words, we want the buyer to be able to negotiate any of those fees. We don't want the seller saying automatically, nope, I'm not paying. You know, that's the whole point of the addendum, is for the buyer to be able to try to negotiate those and submit those negotiations with their contract. So really, those are the 2 changes on the HOA addendum. Hopefully it will encourage the parties to utilize the form the way that it was intended to be utilized. And so for the buyers to feel like they have that negotiation. Yes, Jeff.
Okay, so we do have a question. So in relation to the new forms coming out June 1st, and you already have forms that are out there, we do have some agents that have had their sellers fill out page 3. Should they send in a new form and have them not fill out page 3 and do it over again? Or should they just stick with their original HOA and only new ones going June 1st?
Yeah, so I see that they also said, no, they just filled out page 1. If they just filled out page 1, that's perfectly fine, because it's still allowing for the buyer to still negotiate those fees. And here's the great thing about the changes, which is what I was about going to go further, is that all of the line numbers have stayed the same. So, you know, if you read the article that went out in the Voice Tuesday, that with the changes for and all of the forms, we said, you know, no line numbers were harmed in the revision of this form. So what that means is we know that as the association that there are a lot of homeowners associations that already have downloaded our form, and they have that on file at their, at their office. And so they may not have this new form, and we know transactions are still going to go along. So ultimately, if they haven't downloaded the new form, or they're providing the information to the seller on the old form, it's still going to contain the same information on the exact same line numbers. Does that make sense? So ultimately, it's not really affecting that information that is provided. We're just hoping that this new one will eventually, will work its way in, and then they'll know not to be filling out page 3. So does that answer? Does anybody have any other questions about the HOA or any of the other forms? And that makes sense?
Yes.
Great. So you spoke early on that we have information. So you said, look, you can go find COVID-19 information on AAR's website. You can also go to the National Association of Realtors. We, you don't even have to put in that whole line. I mean, that was a lot of information to, I don't know what the website line that you said, it was like /COVID, et cetera. But if you just go to, and maybe I should know that, I don't know.
No.
If you just go to aaronline.com, it's one of the first portions where it says COVID-19 information. You can click on that coronavirus, click on that, and it'll take you right to what you see in this picture here, which will have all the updates. And we encourage people to visit that site frequently, especially in the beginning. I think we're all kind of operating pretty well now that we've been through this for a couple months now. But that's where all of the information, if there's any new information, first of all, we're always going to print it in the Voice, and then we're always going to submit it to this website too. So if you're wondering if you're thinking, hey, I haven't caught up on, any information AAR has submitted recently regarding what's going on with COVID-19, just click on it. It brings you to everything that we have there. Any articles related to it, the National Association of Realtors, governors, executive orders. So that's a really good and easy link to just click right on it. And so I really think it's important to, if you're just looking for a quick update, especially during these times, that's going to be a good place to go. Now we had, I imagine, hopefully we didn't have many realtors here that had to use the COVID-19 relief hotline, but what AAR had started was the COVID-19 Arizona Realtors Relief Hotline, and essentially what that was a hotline for all members, any member, as long as you're a realtor, to call in and to find out any information if they had financial concerns, right? You couldn't ask legal questions, but if you were wondering about filing for unemployment or any of the programs under the CARES Act for obtaining business loans, things like that. So we had, jumped on, had a hotline established so that members could have somebody to call and just find out, how they can obtain some sort of assistance. But what I do want to say about this is that today is the sunset of this hotline. So in other words, at 4:30 today, this hotline will no longer exist. We think that it's fulfilled what it needs to fulfill at this point in time. When we started the hotline, they were inundated with phone calls. And now they've kind of slowed down quite a bit. Now, in the event that there is a second wave of the coronavirus, as some people, have suggested, we don't know. So that's ultimately, we don't know. But the point is that in the event that something does happen and we do need to reestablish the hotline, it will kind of be there on standby to start back up if anything happens and the members do need it. But it does sunset today. So if you did have a burning question about one of the programs, call in before 4:30 today. That would be my answer to that. Okay, so we have our surprise guest, and Scott was, most of you know Scott Drucker. He is our beloved general counsel here at AAR. I have worked with Scott since 2007, and so I followed him over here to AAR, and he is going to present on the certification for the property access. And while we see he popped up, and I'm going to go ahead and share the, I'm going to, bear with me, please. I'm learning technology too. There we go. Okay, Scott, take it away.
Great, thanks, Nikki. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. And thank you for letting me interrupt your presentation. Doing a great job, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the model COVID-19 certification for property access form. You know that we drafted a couple forms in regard to COVID-19, and hopefully we drafted an addendum that came out in March, and hopefully we'll see that addendum being used less and less. But I do think we're going to continue to see this model certification for property access continued to be used. And the reason is, and I understand, is that you've got sellers, listing agents, tenants, anyone that's occupying the property who's a little concerned or nervous about allowing third parties to enter the home. They don't know these third parties. They don't know whether they've been exposed to COVID-19. They don't know whether the people have been quarantining themselves or taking appropriate precautions. And so they're concerned, right, about allowing someone to come into the home knowing how contagious COVID-19 is. And that's why this form was drafted. It's not a contractual form. It's simply drafted to make those sellers, listing agents, owners, occupants, a little more comfortable with allowing these third parties to come into the property. But recently, Nikki and I have seen some comments on Facebook that I think are misinformed. And so I think it's important to make sure that we're all on the same page in regard to the form itself. You know, and one of the comments I read the other day said, oh, well, you can't use the form because if you do it, it's a HIPAA violation. And a couple people got on and wrote in response, thanks for letting me know. I didn't realize. No, it's not a HIPAA violation, okay? HIPAA applies to medical professionals. It doesn't apply to real estate. It doesn't apply to sellers or listing agents, anything of that sort. So there's no HIPAA violation. Someone else wrote, you know, I wouldn't use that form unless you want to get sued. Well, let me make it clear that we drafted this form specifically to ensure that there is no fair housing violation. At this point in time, we simply don't know whether someone that has COVID-19 would be deemed legally disabled under the Fair Housing Act. Personally, I would say that if the person is healthy enough that they're out and about looking at properties, they probably don't have COVID-19 to the extent that it is substantially limiting a major life activity and therefore constitutes a disability. But we erred on the side of caution in drafting the form. And what we did is, in using the form, we are going to assume that the person that wants to enter the property is legally disabled and therefore is entitled to protections under the Fair Housing Act, okay? Again, erring on the side of caution. So with that in mind, does the form, with use of the form, violate fair housing laws? And the answer should be no. And for three different reasons that I want to go through. First is something that we refer to as the direct threat analysis, okay? You are owners, listing agents, whoever, you are legally entitled to restrict housing or tenancy to someone that constitutes what they call a direct threat to the health and safety of other individuals. And you are allowed to screen for direct threats. And that's the purpose of this form, right? Is to screen for direct threat, to make sure that we're not allowing someone to enter the property that's going to threaten the health, safety, well-being of the occupants. The key, though, is you have to use the form objectively and universally, right? If you're going to use it, you have to use it across the board. You would have to have everybody sign the form, not just people that you may think would be at high risk, right? You can't look at someone and say, you look pretty healthy, you don't have to sign the form. I'm not so sure about you. I'm going to ask you to sign, or to say to someone, oh, you've got young children. Yes, please sign the form. I think you may be at a higher risk for COVID-19. That could be fair housing. It probably would be a fair housing violation. It could constitute discrimination. So if you're going to use it, you've got to use it across the board. You've got to use it impartially. As long as you do that, I think the direct threat analysis, because you're allowed to screen for direct threats, offers protection. The second point that I want to make in regard to the form that I think gives comfort is you'll see there that the form itself, it does not ask any questions. No one is being required to answer any questions. What it does is it states criteria that have to be met to allow entrance or access to the property. Okay. Again, no questions are being asked. We know that you're not supposed to ask someone about the nature of their disability. And so this form specifically doesn't do that, right? I'm not asking someone as they're coming in, do you have COVID-19? I shouldn't be asking that if the person has a disability. What it does, though, is it states criteria. So if someone comes to the door and they read the criteria, and there are, let's see here, how many of those? Six of them, and they turn around because they don't meet the criteria, I have no idea why. Maybe they do have COVID-19. Maybe they've just come into contact with someone that has COVID-19. Maybe they simply returned recently from a country that has a CDC level 3 warning. I don't know, but that's good that I don't know, because I'm not at risk of violating fair housing. And the third point that I would make in regard to the form is, we know that if someone does have a disability, the key is to provide a reasonable accommodation. And that's what is specifically stated on the face of the form. You'll see a sentence there that's towards the bottom. I don't know if Nikki, you highlighted it or not, but it says, if access is prohibited based upon the above, reasonable accommodations can be made to provide virtual access. That's the best we can do, okay? If someone's disabled and they're not able to enter the property, all we have to do is provide a reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodations are fairly easy with the technology that we have in today's world. And so that could include virtual access. If the person says, no, I want to see it in person, okay, we'll provide a reasonable accommodation, which would be, okay, after you've quarantined for 14 days, that would be a reasonable accommodation. At that point in time, they would be allowed access. So for all of those reasons, I feel very confident in the form, and that it does protect the individuals that are using it, and it's not going to expose them to any sort of fair housing violations. So those are the points that I wanted to make. And I don't know if anybody, Nikki, has any questions on that. They can feel free to type them in or unmute themselves if they do, and ask anything. But that's really what I wanted to talk about. So I appreciate the time. Thank you, Nikki.
Oh, you want to hold tight just to see if there's any questions?
Sure.
I'm going to switch my screen over while you're holding tight.
All right. Well, it looks like I'm all good, Nikki. So thank you guys very much. Enjoy.
That's how thorough you are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Scott. He's only a couple offices away. I have to be nice. Pick him out, Amanda. I'm just kidding. Yeah, thank you, Scott. I mean, he does a great job on that portion and presenting, because I do know that we both know that there have been a lot of questions regarding that form, and so I think I agree with Scott that we thoroughly considered it and what the questions that were being asked, and we think that it is not going to subject liability on anybody in the event that they so choose to use that form, or their clients would request such a form to be filled out. So on to the next. We have, can you see, I'm sharing my correct screen, right? You see the COVID-19 addendum, Jeff? Okay, perfect. There was some fine tweaking to this morning. I was trying to go back and forth from screen, so not entirely sure I was sharing the right one. Now, as you guys know, we created the COVID-19 addendum. I mean, in the wake of everything that was happening, that you can see this form was created in March. So just a couple months ago. And normally, you know, we have this, this was pushed through pretty fast so that we could help protect, you know, our members and their clients in the process, because so many people were starting to want to cancel because of the pandemic, et cetera. Have you used this form yourself, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, so now you can use, I mean, now in today's time, do you just weigh it on how your clients are feeling at that point in time? If they're wanting some sort of extra assurance at the time of submitting a contract? Because ultimately, when this form was created, it's midway through, right? So you could have used this addendum midway through a transaction.
I included in the original. I tried to get it. You were giving them so many papers to sign and everything right off the bat. You might as well just throw it in there. Bringing it down a week later, 2 weeks later, when they start to actually look or whatever it is, it just adds to the confusion for them. So I bring it up originally along with the contract and everything else, and explain everything to them at once.
Yeah, and you know, you never know who you're dealing with and how it's going to work, and sometimes it's just easier to get everything out of the way in the beginning, right? Address all of the situation, you know, all the scenarios that you can, and then deal with the particularities of it as you go through your transaction. So especially now that the form has been created, we can use that form in the beginning, of course. Now, is it a requirement? It's not a requirement. You know, it's definitely not something that a party has to sign, but you can use it at any point in time, because that's what an addendum is throughout the transaction. So what I really wanted to talk about is ultimately this addendum, and I'm sure you guys, you know, you probably don't need this extra, but so I'll go over them quickly. But you know, it basically offers 4 options, right? The addendum does. And the first option is for the parties just to ultimately decide, hey, look, let's just postpone it and extend the deadline because we don't know what's going on, or let's say, you know, they just aren't feeling comfortable with it, so they decide to just extend the close of escrow date. And so you can use that option 1, you know, pretty easy to extend the close of escrow date. Option number 2, and I highlighted the main portions. It's kind of that I think are the important parts of it, is that if somebody becomes subject to a voluntary or mandatory COVID-19 virus quarantine or closure at prior to or at the time of close of escrow, that the parties are agreeing at this point in time, okay, fine, we will extend the contract terms, you know, the close of escrow for 10 days until after the quarantine or the closure is lifted. Now, we had, you know, some members that said, why did you put voluntary in there? Because someone could utilize that, right? Someone could say, well, I'm going to voluntarily quarantine myself. Well, when we created this form, that's pretty much all you could do initially, right? Because we didn't have as many tests available. You might not have been able to get into your doctor. And so it made sense that it could be they knew they were exposed to somebody that had COVID-19, or that they were voluntarily quarantining themselves because they were a higher risk individual. And so I don't know how you feel, or if you guys have seen many people take advantage of that. I mean, ultimately, that's great, because I mean, at the end of the day, people still have to be, you know, have good faith in their contracts. And so I think, you know, yes, that's hard to prove, but you still have that good faith that has to go along with entering into any type of contract. But this is the best way that we could go about with creating verbiage for allowing the parties to extend. And lucky for us, we didn't have to worry about any of those items closing down. Lenders weren't closing down really for the most part. I mean, I'm sure smaller ones were, but you know, escrow companies, the county recorders. So that's option number 2. Option number 3, now this option is essentially the same in that in the event of same thing, voluntary or mandatory quarantine or closure, then the parties agree at this point in time to extend the close of escrow date for up to 10 days. However, there's an end time frame for it, right? But it won't exceed 30 days. So even if something happens, we're still not going to exceed this close of escrow date beyond 30 days. If that's the case, then either party, the verbiage here, either party may terminate this agreement in writing without further liability, and the earnest money shall be released to the buyer. Now, I mean, we weren't really too keen on just allowing a buyer to have an out in the contract. So if you ask me, or if you ask Scott, option 3 is not either one of our favorite options, because ultimately you want a transaction to close, right? You don't want somebody to get cold feet in that period of up to 30 days and just say, no, now I don't have to give you a reason. I'm just gonna cancel now because this is what this provision says. So, I mean, quite frankly, I would steer away from that provision, but it had to be provided so that we could cover, most scenarios. I see. Okay, you asked the question, Jeff. So then option 4, buyer and seller agreed to cancel the contract and the earnest money shall be released to the buyer. Pretty simple, right? The parties have just decided, okay, we don't want to go on with this transaction anymore. We're just going to cancel it and we're going to move on and go our own ways. Of course, now, here's the thing that we don't want to happen. You don't want, when you're using this addendum, you don't want to have any of those options 1, 2, 3, or 4 all marked together, right? You only get to pick one of those 4 options, because in the event that that somebody check marks multiple of those options, what they are creating is confusion, and then you're leaving it to where the addendum is really ineffective, because that's a dispute just waiting to happen on which one really applies, and then the terms aren't going to line up with each other. Now there is, after this option 4, there is additional terms and conditions, which also has a checkbox. You could absolutely fill in that portion, checkbox one of the 4 options, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and additional terms if you have additional terms that you wanted to add on to one of those other options. But do not, whatever you do not have, check mark 1, 2, 3, and 4, any of those combinations together. So sounds like that form has been very good. I brought Scott back. So here is, I took this picture before close, before all of this happened, and I told, these are my coworkers. In case those of you who do not know them, I'm going to introduce you to them right now. Of course, this is Scott. We just saw him earlier. I'm going to put it right there in the middle of his head. Here's Carol Ridley. Carol Ridley is the Professional Standards Administrator. And here is Jan Stewart. She is the Manager of Risk Management. And the reason that I took this picture, and I told him, I said, first of all, you guys get to go with me everywhere I go now. Isn't that fun? I get to bring my coworkers with me. I love my coworkers. They're great. But I asked them, I kind of went to all of their offices before this happened, and I said, what would you say? You would give advice. What advice would you give to the members out there if you were to say something? And so I think that this best represents it, right? So we have see no evil, right? We know what these stand for. So I said to Scott, well, what yours is going to mean is if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, right? So make sure you put it in writing, because putting it in writing, I don't care what it is that you put in writing, the simplest conversation, because at the end of the day, what you think could be something so simple could turn into something very big when somebody finally becomes disgruntled, or they, something else falls apart later on. Then they start bringing everything, that was said or done. So let's say you have a conversation with your client, and your client is like, I'm really, uncomfortable about this, so put in writing. Here are the people that you can, check out for inspections, whatever the conversation happens to be. Or, we held a discussion regarding this today. I'm confirming that this is the way that you want to move forward. Whatever the conversation is, put it in writing, just a recap of what your conversation was, because ultimately I can tell you that that could save you at the end of the day. In the event that you have some sort of claim, it could save you. And I also say this because prior to being a lawyer, I was a paralegal. And when I was a paralegal, part of my job, I used to have to subpoena the world for lawsuits, right? We did broker defense because I worked for Rick Mack and I worked with Scott over at Rick Mack. And so when I would subpoena the world, when I would receive, first I would ask the broker for their file, the agent for their file, and then I'd start subpoenaing everybody. I'd subpoena the lenders, I'd subpoena the title folks, everybody. And in that process, when I would get those files from the broker or the agent, and it is a good file, it's in order, you know, they have their timeline, they have, you know, everything that supports their position, it's so much easier to get them out of trouble in the event, you know, that a situation arises, because we know at the end of the day, generally speaking, when lawsuits arise, it's going to be the buyers that are going to sue. Usually it's a condition of the property or something like that. Then that says, look, there was non-disclosure of this item, or there was a material defect, a latent defect. And so they didn't tell me, and now I'm going to come after everybody, because as the lawyer, that's our job. We have to make sure we don't forget any party. So the real estate agent's always going to get sued. And I'm not trying to put the fear of God into anybody. I'm just trying to put the best practices, right? The fear so that you're ensuring that you're performing the best practice. I mean, because ultimately you're the professional. Make sure you get it in writing, even those minor conversations when they make a decision about something, so they can't come back and say, and it ultimately ends up being a he said, she said. That's what we don't want, is a he said, she said. So that's what Scott represents. Carol, you know, Carol is, she hears all the complaints, right? She hears all the complaints that we get at AAR. She said, you know, if we practice risk management and practice those things that we should be by erring on the side of caution too, we're not going to have to worry about what could come her way. You know, for the most part, if you follow the code of ethics, you are going to, it's the code of ethics, the law almost mirrors the code of ethics, right? There's just a little bit slight differences here and there. But if you're abiding by the code of ethics, you should, for the most part, not have to worry about meeting Carol Ridley. And we love Carol Ridley, but it's not something that you ever want to have to jeopardize yourself too. We have a question.
Yeah. So we did have a question. Nancy Christopherson, she was asking, well, why would you even bring up the COVID-19 addendum if there's nothing going on to affect anything during the escrow period? I can answer part of that.
Sure.
I do it initially because we are in a pandemic situation. We're coming out the other end, hopefully. Cross our fingers. Everybody doing good. The buyers, the sellers both know the situation that everybody is in.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it, to me, I feel that it lets the buyer know that we are taking all of this very seriously and that we're protecting them and we're protecting the sellers, and it starts that conversation so that all the respect. So I don't have to have the conversation when I show up at a house and say, do you have a mask? Here's a mask from my truck. I always equip all of my buyers with masks and gloves. I don't have booties, and if that's a requirement, I kind of count on the seller's agent, the listing agent, to take care of that if they need those. But it starts the conversation, it gets it going, so everybody's aware of what the situation is. And then when I get to the house, again, I don't have to explain why we're doing this, why we're not doing that, or whatever. It's all, as Scott had said, you do it for one, you do it for all. My personal, what I do is I have my buyers, I ask them if they want to ride with me. I ask all my buyers if they want to ride with me. If they want to ride in their own car, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. If they want to ride with me, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. But I don't pick and choose who I think could ride with me. And I know that not all buyers, I have some that come in here with rent a car. They don't have an idea where they're going or anything else. They're coming from back east. So instead of having to follow me around because they're looking everywhere, they haven't seen the area, I take them with me. So I offer it to everybody. And so that's why I do the form initially, so that I can get them involved with what's happening and so that they're aware. But that's just me personally.
Yeah, and I think that that's great, right? Because you're being proactive instead of reactive. It's better to, if you're proactive, you don't have to react to something. It maybe react the wrong way. If you're proactive and you're saying the conversation could go something like, look, this might not affect you right now, and this might not affect them right now. But in the events, because we don't know, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns out there. We don't know if, we don't know if they could contract it at some point in time, COVID-19, or, because it could be just simple as they went to the grocery store and all of a sudden they contracted it. And if you're proactive and you have these forms filled out in advance, you already know, here's the end result from that, right? You don't have to go in and say, oh shoot, they just contracted, one of the parties just contracted COVID-19, how are we gonna deal with this? And then have the other party say, no, I'm holding firm to this. There's no way. I mean, we need to be out. We're not going to budge. They've already asked for 10 things on the binzer. I mean, every transaction is different, right? And so now they don't want to give any more, or maybe the parties have a great rapport and they do. But this way, if you're proactive, you don't have to worry about being reactive or any of the other details that come up in a transaction that could potentially affect a party's willingness to do something more than what they would have done. Does that make sense? So, and I like to say that it's kind of akin to this, and this is nothing to do with real estate, but when I was in, I think, paralegal school, I had my family law teacher say, you see this mug right here? And I'm using something here. He was like, sometimes having a prenup is going to be good because this cup right here, you don't care about that cup today. But when it comes time for a divorce, you're going to pay like $300,000 for that cup, right? Because all of a sudden, people's emotions are wrapped up. And we already know that in a real estate transaction, people's emotions are always heightened, right? Because, I mean, I've been there too. And even as being in real estate, as long as I have, even when I purchased, I still had those same emotions and cloudiness and all that stuff. So I think that that's, as the professional, it's incumbent upon you to address those situations and to help them address those situations before they become an issue. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So back to my slide, Jan, and then we have lovely Jan Stewart over here, and hers was, people don't communicate enough. And we know this about our industry, right? We know this, that, well, not even our industry, it's the times. People don't communicate enough in general anymore. I'm hopeful that with all these Zoom calls, I like these Zoom calls because we do seem to communicate pretty well. And I like seeing, like, I still feel like I'm interacting with you a lot right now, Jeff. These are nice. I think it's helping people to try and err on this, safe side and to communicate more. But ultimately, that's what she's saying is, look, make sure you communicate. And that kind of goes hand in hand with Scott, right? Put it in writing. That's also communication. That's communicating what is going on in your transaction. So they all kind of flow together, one right with another. And then what I wanted to kind of say about this too is that, Carol and I talked, and we think following this pandemic, what we might see with regard to like code of ethics complaints is we might see an increase in Articles 1 and 9. And if you don't know what that is, Article 1 is, protecting and promoting your client's interests or dealing fairly and honestly with the parties. So protecting and promoting. So I'm just going to give an example. Let's just say, and this isn't my personal feeling, but I'm just going to make something up. Let's just say I could care less. I don't believe in COVID-19. I don't believe that it's anything but the flu, right? But then I have my client here who is freaked out and wants to have all of the protections that they want to have a face mask, they want to have gloves, they want to have booties, they want to have all of those things. They want hand sanitizer, they want to make sure that they're not touching anything. They want to make sure that the house is empty if they're viewing it. You know what? That's part of protecting and promoting your client's interest, right? Ensuring that just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that your client is going to feel the same way. And the best way for you to do is to make sure you're putting on that hat, you know, that says, what is the best way for me to represent them? And if this is their feeling about it, or let's say the buyer or the seller feel opposite, you know, they're on opposite ends of the spectrum on how they feel about this, you still respect the way that other people feel about it, because we don't know, and we can't assume or suggest to know that we know where another party is coming from. It could be that one of those parties is out there protecting their family. They're the only one that their elderly parent has to rely on, and they're the one that, you know, has to make sure that they get their groceries for them, and they're the only one that can contact them. And so just because they look young and healthy doesn't mean that they don't have another reason for feeling the way that they do. And I think that, you know, we have to be leery about that. I think already, you know, real estate agents are, like, you guys, persons, for the lack of a better word, to the best that you guys can be. But I have taken calls here at AAR where they, you know, I've had a seller saying, well, I just want to sell my home, and now my real estate agent is not returning my phone calls because she thinks she's going to catch COVID-19 through the phone, you know. And if that's the case, and if you feel that way, refer it. Refer it to somebody that can still help your client, right? That way it's kind of it's a win-win deal. You can still make some money off of it with a referral, but you're getting your client what they need at the end of the day, right? So I think that we need to ensure that we're mindful of where all the parties are and what it could be that they're going through, because we don't know what another side is going through. And so just to be careful of that, because I think we're going to get, you know, some of those saying they didn't listen to me. I wanted this, and they still chose to do what they wanted because they didn't believe, you know, COVID-19 was a thing, and I wanted to make sure that we were fully protected, right? So things like that. And we, you know, we've you know, we have things on our website that talk about how to show homes, turning the lights on, making sure you have, you know, antibacterial wipes, and so that the least amount of surfaces can be touched when showing a home, you know, things of that nature. So I think that that's going to be one that we see an increase in. And we also think probably Article 9, which is why I keep saying, put it in writing, put those conversations in writing, because what a person might say, maybe they don't communicate it the same way, but just clarify, right? Just send that email saying, so we had a conversation about this today. My understanding is this. If I'm wrong, please let me know. Because then that gives them the perfect opportunity to tell you, oh, we're not on the same page. And then you can try and figure out whatever way it is that you need to communicate with them. And so I think that those are the two main articles that I think Carol and I both think we're going to see an increase of. We also think that we suspect that there's going to be increased property management filings. And that's because once evictions start occurring again, you know, it's just, it is what it is. We haven't right now had, in the last few months, we haven't had any complaints related to property management, probably because nobody's being evicted for the most part, you know, and everybody's just biding their time. So that's what we think we will see. Let's see, on to my next slide. Do you guys have any questions for me? I don't think so. I hope that I don't see any. I feel like I've been pretty thorough. Do you guys have any questions about the times, or, you know, what else we're seeing? I'm going to move on, and then we'll just wait and see if we have any.
I got a question. So being that you're so close to the Capitol and all, have you heard anything, any rumors about what the next phase of opening might be in June? I'm anticipating hearing from Governor Ducey on the 1st, possibly our mayors here locally, but I was just wondering if you'd heard anything about what might be coming up.
I have not. I actually went last night probably after 5 o'clock, I went to Governor Ducey's to the website just to see what is new and upcoming right now. And I see that yesterday he announced that schools will reopen in the fall, and that summer camps, I don't know how many of you were affected. I was affected by a summer camp. They canceled. So I no longer have care for my child this summer. But that's the next phase that I saw, was that they are going to at least have school, and they are going to reopen some summer camps. I think Matt would have a better pulse. Matt Conarelli would have a better pulse on that, because he's, you know, he's the head of the legislative department, and he, of course, that's more where he is located. And because, no, I saw Matt Conarelli today. So we are in the office. Most of us from AAR are working from home, and we are still abiding by the CDC's guidelines and social distancing, and coming to the office in fewer numbers. So we have just 2 departments right now at a time, 2 or 3 max departments at a time that are coming into the office. We are still close to our members and to the public. So in other words, our doors are not open, but staff we do come to the office twice a week. So unless I happen to run into one of them, which I'm not always here with all my coworkers. I did see Matt today, but it was more like we were just walking in the door together. So I wish I could answer that for you. That's the most that I know at this time, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question from Nancy. Does it make sense let sellers and buyers choose what level of protection they are comfortable with during showings?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that absolutely. I mean, so right now, we are holding virtual hearings, and I sent out an email saying we might have to have this ethics hearing in person. And one of the members said, I said, if all CDC restrictions are lifted, et cetera, and she said, well, do you care if I still wear a mask, even if it's lifted? And I was like, absolutely not. We want to ensure you feel safe. And I think that goes the same for your clients, right? Ensure that your clients feel safe. There's other ones, other people that absolutely not. I had this lady yesterday that I talked to, and she was like, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not wearing a mask in Costco. And, and I thought, well, okay, you do.
Well, then you're not shopping at Costco here, because they won't let you in.
She was. She told me she had been to, because I was like, how did you do that? But yeah, I think that you have to go with people's comfort levels, and
you do, but you also have to respect the seller's wishes too. So
absolutely.
The seller lives there. So if the seller requires that your buyers wear a mask, regardless of your buyers, then you find some other house to show them. Because if that seller requires that you abide by the COVID-19 restrictions, then you have no choice but to do that, regardless of what your buyer wants.
Yeah, and I would agree with that you err on the side of caution at all times. So, did we answer your question, Nancy? So what's new at Arizona Realtors? We are working on currently creating a statewide listing agreement form. So exclusive rights, so AR and EA, and we'll find out if that comes to fruition. I mean, we've just started the process because of COVID-19. We also had to cancel multiple meetings. We held our first meeting by way of Zoom this month. And so I encourage you, in the event that if you're not part of the loop, which I failed to mention when I talked about form revisions, is there's a process to forms. And essentially what that is before a form is released, we send it out to something that's called the loop. And that is, if you are signed up to be on that, you would be the first one to see any type of revisions that are going to come out on any type of form, a new form, any revisions to a form. And we send it out because we're asking for your feedback, because I don't practice real estate, right? So we need to have those practitioners give us feedback and advice on things to take into consideration. Most of the time we've already considered them because of the work group members. But there are times when there's somebody that could give us a recommendation that nobody thought of, or there's been time, and that recommendation is like, oh yeah, it does make sense. And because this is potentially a statewide, we want to, we would like for, if it comes about, we would like for all MLSs to utilize it. It'd be easier for the parties, the brokers, to know what the listing agreement form says. It's all I can say is we were asked to create one, so we are in the process. Whether or not that comes to full fruition, time will tell. But that's what we are working on. Arizona Housing Fund. I'm sure you guys have seen information about it. It's to help with the homeless, to ask if your client or you would like to donate $25 to help with homeless people. I'm not going to go into the whole big thing about that, but also new at Arizona Realtors, because of the times, we've been holding ethics, because I was asked to address, code ethics and things like that. We've been holding ethics hearings remote by way of Zoom, and it's been fantastic. It's worked out very well. It is worked out better than we anticipated. We are moving along. Cases are getting done. Parties, because as you can see, I think the more comfortable we all become with this, we don't feel that it's so weird anymore, right? And look, I'm not a technology person either. I always get told, did you turn it off? And I'm like, why? Why do you always have to ask me that question? Because that is the first step I forget. But I have to be asked it. And so technology is not a bad thing. It's working out very well for all of us, especially to abide by the CDC guidelines, to social distance. And because even if we were to all, to get together, if let's say there were a group of 10 of us or less and we had face masks on, it's not going to do us so well to hold a hearing, and to hearing people, seeing facial expressions. There's a lot lost because, as you guys know, even now, like just the way you interact with people, if you can see head nodding, I see you nodding, because I do that a lot too. When I talk to people or I'm listening, I do this a lot too, because it's my way of showing you I'm listening to you, I'm paying attention to you, right? And I want you to know. And you might not, a lot would be lost if we were trying to hold hearings.
So do you anticipate after all the restrictions, hopefully, cross fingers again, are lifted and people aren't, asked to wear masks, they're free to do what they want to do, kind of thing. Do you anticipate a lot of Zoom meetings to continue? Because they're a lot easier to schedule, right? I mean, you have to schedule out 14 days to give people on their calendar time to drive to wherever the meeting is and that sort of thing. But with a Zoom, you can send it out and say, hey, in 3 days, you guys got time here? And they can all tell you, yeah, that's a good time, and take care of things a lot faster than you would have to in person.
Right. I do. I anticipate that definitely professional standards will try and hold Zoom hearings as much as we possibly can, because it works. And the benefit to that, if you've ever considered joining professional standards, the benefit to that is now we can hold hearings. Let's say it's a Phoenix agent, but now we can actually include all the surrounding areas, because most of the time people don't want to drive, right? You're taken away from your business, you're taken away from, your time, all those other things, money, things like that. And that's why you guys are volunteers. So we respect that. And so I found that we have more availability by our professional standards members. They are more likely to show up. I don't know how you guys feel about your attendance for all of the Zoom meetings you've been hearing, but I think it is easier to show up.
Too. I think we're going to have to consider maybe for our board meetings and committee meetings, that sort of thing. There is the as a board chairman. As chairman of the board and the board, that you want to protect the board members. So having, there's certain things that you want to make sure that there isn't other people in the room that are listening to, they might only be able to hear one side of the conversation because you're on mute or something, but they still hearing part of the conversation. So, there's certain things that we have to do to protect our board members. So that'll be discussed. But I really do think that, especially for emergency type meetings, executive committee meetings, that sort of thing, trying to get people all in one room to address something immediate. I think the Zoom is a great tool to use to get things done quickly and move on to something else.
Yeah, let me ask the participants this. How do you guys feel about virtual showings and things like that? Have we been working, have we been doing a lot of those? Has that really hindered your ability to, has this really hindered your ability to practice all that much? I mean, I assume there's a lot more virtual showings.
Yeah, I don't see anybody responding. I've always, I think that we were moving into the virtual already with Matterport and all the other, abilities to do out there. So I think that, we were kind of set up for that already out here. But I don't know if there's been more. I think there's been consistency. Molly did say in the beginning, more video and virtual tours, not so much now. Yeah, I think people are getting back to their normal, but with our flex abilities and stuff, we kind of get that option anyway.
Okay.
So yeah, and then people, again, they pay for outside services to do that sort of thing. So being that they had that in their portfolio, as it were, for each listing already as part of their cost for doing a listing, I think they just continued to do that. The people that weren't might have had a little bit of difficulty trying to download some sort of 3D or 360 Google thing on their phone and trying that, and that didn't really work out, kind of thing. So they may get back to what they were doing, but I think that it's been pretty consistent with previous to now.
Yeah. Well, and what I do like about this, Molly, thank you, and Charlie, I said in the beginning, more videos, virtual tours, not so much. I think that just goes to show you that you're still needed, right? You're still needed to be in person, and people still want to have that interaction, and they still want to, physically go in and see. And so, I know that with all of the iBuyers and things like that, that were the big issue prior to this, I think it should tell you something about the necessity of still pounding the pavement and being the person that is the realtor that goes and assists them through the transaction.
I agree, and I think professionalism is what keeps it that way. So the more professional we can be, with all these different technologies and different avenues that we can use, sometimes you get kind of lost in all of that and you forget that the customer's sitting on the other side of their phone at home waiting for you to make that phone call, and you're sending them this and you're sending them that, but they want to talk to you.
Right.
So I think that as long as you keep that professionalism up and realize that the customer is the important person, not all of this technology that you want to send to them.
Right.
And yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Know your audience. That's what they always say, right? Know your audience. I mean, that's what we do. Like before you're about to go to court, you research your judge, you research your opposing counsel, you research people, and you know your audience so that you know who to be at that moment in time.
Well, you do. I just rely on you to do that for me.
Well, with that said, I am actually done, unless anybody has any questions, which hopefully we were thorough enough. Hopefully you gleaned something from this. I enjoyed participating with you guys virtually.
Well, thank you, Nikki. And I know I feel more informed. So I am really thankful that we were able to do this. I want to thank Nicole for putting this all together for us, and Amanda. Let's, to our members who joined us, thank you for joining, and thank you for our staff for putting together this resource. If you have other ideas or other topics or programs we can provide to help you, please contact Amanda, anybody in the office, but Amanda, go with the CEO, Amanda, but anybody in the office can help you if she's not available. And let's put more of these together. I think it would be fantastic. Nikki, I want to thank you again. It's been a long time since I've seen you, so hi.
Yes, all of you guys.
Yes.
Hey, Jeff.
Hopefully we can have you back up here soon.
Jeff, can I interject real quick? We're going to be releasing the video of this. So if you guys watched it today and you think people in your offices or other people at PAAR, please help us share the link when we post it in Recess and Facebook. It'll be in the weekly update, hopefully. for this week or next week if we can't get it out today. But please help us share that information because we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable and knows what's going on, because like they said, there's a lot of different ways. Some people are really comfortable. Some people think it's conspiracy. Some people think it's the end of the world. And we want to make sure no matter what their personal views are, that they're taken care of and that they know that realtors are here to help. So please help us get the video out and do anything you can. And thank y'all all so much for being here today. Hopefully we'll be able to spread the word even more by sharing that recording.
Okay,
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Jeff.